Hello, everybody. This is the bi-weekly AWS Cloud Provider meeting. I am your moderator, facilitator for the day, Justin Santa Barbara. I work at Google. Reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be put on the internet, and therefore please be mindful of our code of conduct. I can't recall if I said it, but if I did not say it, today is Friday, October 2nd, 2020. We have a couple of things, well, more than a couple of things. We have more than a handful of things on our agenda. Please do feel free to add your name and any other items to the agenda so we can be sure to go through them and get to them all in order. We probably don't need it, but if we do need it, please do feel free to use the raise hand feature. And otherwise, I guess we can jump right in with the first topic, which is Nadir, who wants to talk about the V2 provider. Nadir.
Yeah, hi. So I think Andrew Sycamore started this work. So we're doing a V2 provider. It's just getting started. We need to do some common things such as adding Prometheus metrics, retry behavior and throttling. I was talking with Jay Pipes a couple of weeks ago, and he suggested we look at the app mesh controller for Kates. And there's a sort of private package in there that does some really nice throttling and just does the metrics quite cleanly. So we're okay on copying that in. We're also doing roughly the same thing in Cluster API. I'm just wondering if there's a case for making a sort of shared, like a repo for a lot of the common behavior that we have across sub-projects that work with AWS. I think there's also similar use cases in the cluster autoscaler maybe. I mean, for the first stab, we can just copy these into these separate repos, but I think over time it might make sense to have a shared repository for this. Just wondering what people think.
Yeah, I can't. Oh, go ahead, Andrew. Sorry.
No, go ahead first, Justin.
I think it sounds like a great idea. I think a nice way to get started is to put it into your repo and make it a Go module, and then it should be consumable elsewhere without even needing your repo. And yeah, I don't know if we need to do more than that right away, but I feel like it's a great way to do it and demonstrate it. I have some other thoughts about what this should look like, but I'll let Andrew go first.
Yeah, I was basically, I agree with you, Justin. There was some useful like utils and libraries and even like the current legacy provider that would have been useful to port over, but it's not like its own standalone library, which makes it hard. And yeah, like across all the repos in the Kubernetes community that talk to the AWS APIs, it seems like there's a lot of duplicated code. So I think it would be great if we can agree on a central place. Maybe it's cloud provider AWS, maybe it's something else. But as we're kind of like building out the initial like V2 implementation, there's a lot of code that we're just copying over that, and it'd be great if it was just shared libraries.
Yeah, the thing I wanted to say was we've had a lot of in the past. We historically have had trouble with rate limits, and the throttler in the legacy cloud provider is non-obvious in its behavior, in that it will back off all calls to the AWS API across the entire process based on observing rate limit exceptions, rate limit errors, which is not the default behavior of the AWS SDK, which backs off, if I recall correctly, that particular call. And so the reason we did this was because we had some bugs and sometimes a bug, but sometimes a like just aggressive behavior where we would call the AWS APIs effectively in a loop and a reconcile loop, and we would hit a rate limit and basically shut down or get the entire AWS account into a state where it was unable to serve or did not allocate capacity. I'm trying not to use the right word. They would not allocate capacity to any more API calls on that account. So like if you had anything else running in your AWS account, it would not be able to execute AWS calls. One of the things I
think generally they're API specific, service specific. So I feel like going with the per service rate limit would be
yes,
possibly the right way to go.
Yeah, I mean, it should be. I can't remember whether we did it on all services or not, but if I recall correctly, the default AWS SDK does not do per service rate limit. It does per call. Like it does per call backoffs, and so that's a good behavior to look at. The other one is the sort of meta point there is one of the reasons we had this problem, I think, was because if you're reconciling 100 volumes concurrently, we try to treat those as 100 separate operations. And the other approach, which I think, I want to say blocks or something, like AWS had a project called blocks or box or something. Anyway, it showed a way where you basically you would bulk fetch the volumes, like get all the volumes in a sort of bounded synchronization loop, so that it would basically be constant. If you were reconciling, you would make one described volumes call every n seconds as opposed to a variable number. So it was like, that was a nice model, and that might be worth thinking about in terms of the other way to address this challenge.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. The one from the app mesh controller is pretty nice. So you basically define a bucket on regexes for different API service calls, and it's all configurable on the command line as well, so you can override everything, and it will just block the entire SDK on those list of calls that you've defined. So it's pretty neat in terms of the way it operates.
That sounds nice. It sounds like a much more general and perhaps better implemented version of the thing I hacked together a couple of years ago. Yes, because you want a cross-call bucket effectively. Yes, and I like that approach, the regex approach. That's nice.
So if we like the throttling library there, then should we? I feel like Cloud Provider would be a better place for a central library than the app mesh controller. So should we maybe try to move that? I can bring that up with the maintainers over there.
Yeah, it's actually private, so you actually do have to. We actually have to copy it over. You can't really consume it from outside of that mesh controller. It's like an internal. It's marked as internal bits of it.
Got it.
It's not easily consumable.
Yeah, I'm thinking that them, the app mesh controller consuming it from Cloud Provider. Cloud Provider just seems like a better place to store stuff that we're going to use across all of our AWS components. I can bring it up.
Yeah, sounds good to me. Can we also maybe have a tracking issue for this in the repo? Maybe Nadir, since you have the context, you can open one.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I don't know if there's anything else on that. If not, we can go on to the next topic, which is E2E, Nadir, on E2E testing and some SSM permissions.
Yeah, so now that we've got the conformance kube test stuff into the Cluster API test framework, going to start adding E2E tests to the Cloud Provider AWS repository. One of the things that we have is we look over all the EC2 instances that are in that sort of bus clause account and just scrape files on them. We do that using SSM Session Manager, but our prior accounts are sort of completely blocked on using SSM. I think it's set up on some organizational policy. It's been like that for ages, so we've not been able to have instance logs in Cluster API for quite a while. It would be good to get that cleaned up, because it's often if something is badly wrong with the cloud provider or something, you're not going to have a working cluster. You need some out-of-band process to be able to get logs for debugging.
Yes, I think this might be blocked on me, and I think I was blocked on getting a PR merged that actually, because I scripted the setup of these and then oh yeah, it's still working. No, it's been open. It has EduTM. It just hasn't been approved. Why has it not been approved? But yes, if you look at this PR that I'm about to paste in, of course, I'm sure that when I scroll down the last comment, it's going to be something I have to do. But anyway, this PR, relevant. That's the PR which adds the accounts. And I'm just trying to see. Okay. So I guess I should put it in a GCS bucket. I guess that's what we're blocked on. But those are the accounts I hope you're using. If we scroll down somewhere, there should be a list of the policies. I'm just sort of scrolling.
Yeah, I see it. Yeah.
Do you see it? I was scrolling to see the actual policy.
Yeah, we just need to add. It's very close to the bottom in main.ts, modules user main.ts.
Yes. I see IAM full access, Amazon EC2 full access, AWS Deep Racer CloudFormation access policy, which seems to be the pre-built one for CloudFormation. So we effectively need to add SSM there. That's a topic for another day.
Okay.
But the one you want is you want SSM full. Yes, if I get this merged, we should be able to PR in Amazon SSM full access policy, and then it sounds like I should rerun it. But it sounds like I need to get the GCS bucket as the store, the backend store for the Terraform state, and then that will unblock the objections, I guess.
Okay, cool.
I think you're using these accounts, but I guess we actually don't have a way to know easily. So, but yes, anyway, these are the scripted accounts which we can sort of rotate in anyway.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we're using them. And in terms of the E2E test, we should use the same accounts for cloud provider testing, the same ones that we're using for cluster API.
From my point of view, I don't see why not. There is the potential to set up different pools of accounts, different boss cost pools of accounts. I'm not entirely sure how that works. So if we did want to start doing that we could do that. I don't know if it really solves the problem, to be honest.
All right.
Okay, so it sounds like I have some stuff to do there, but if there's nothing else, the next item on our agenda, Andrew, the new node naming policies for the V2 provider. Hopefully there will be no policy, but carry on.
Yeah, so I guess like that's part of the discussion is like, do we even need a config for a user to indicate what the naming of a node should be? And I think this is going to be, so right now, Nicole, a coworker of mine, is working on the initial instances V2 implementation. And the thing that we're probably the thing we need to decide is like, because we can't depend on the kubelet assigning the provider ID ahead of time. So how do we decide and discover nodes? I think we definitely want to support private DNS because that is the existing behavior. And I'm sure in many cases that is still the desired behavior. The other obvious one is being able to match nodes by instance name, which assumes that the instance name is unique for a given cluster. But then I also wanted to ask the group if we feel strongly about other policies on how to name instances that map to Kubernetes nodes. Am I making sense?
The specific use case that I've heard from some of our customers is wanting to name them the instance ID, or they just want like complete control over it and be able to provide some custom name.
Andrew, can you clarify the issue on or the why we can't depend on the kubelet or the provider ID field?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I probably should start with that context. So like in the external case, the kubelet doesn't understand. So today, like if you set cloud provider AWS on the kubelet, it knows how to query the metadata service and find its provider ID, and it'll set its provider ID when it registers. In the external case, it just registers itself and it's up to the provider to discover the node by name, which is tricky because it kind of assumes certain properties of the node and the instance that make it possible. You can actually set a provider ID in the kubelet using the external provider, but that puts the operational overhead on the user to set the provider ID ahead of time. And so, yeah, there needs to be some known semantics on how instance names match to instance nodes, and maybe it's auto-discovered using a set of a known formats that the instance should be named, or there should be a config that says the name has to be the private DNS, or a name has to be the instance name or the instance ID or whatnot, in order for the external cloud controllers to discover and register the instance.
So the other option would be to have a component that can effectively immediately after the node has been registered by the kubelet, like assign the provider ID and write it in. So Cluster API, I think, would have a mechanism to do that. I think COPS on AWS now has a mechanism to do that because we do our own handshake with the kubelet. Essentially, if you give the kubelet a unique bootstrap token, I think, but anyway, unique credentials, then you can sort of thread it through. We are doing it in COPS for security. I think there could be a similar argument elsewhere, and it's effectively, there is still some form of mapping from a kubelet created node, which does not have a provider ID, to a provider ID, but that can be a sort of first step before anything else is allowed to happen, like before you start attaching volumes and stuff to it, maybe.
I'm not sure I'm following. So
you would then not, there wouldn't be a requirement on the node name necessarily. The AWS Cloud Provider v2 would rely on provider ID, and there would be some component which does implement a policy for populating the provider ID. That might be by a policy on the node name, or in the case of Cluster API or COPS, it might be a policy on how the node got created. I'm sure like Cluster API and COPS would both be very happy to like sort of standardize that flow to make it, the reason COPS is doing it is for security, like to make sure that you can't just arbitrarily register a node, and that there's basically a cross-check against, in our case, the AWS APIs to like go and assert the validity of the nodes joining.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But do we, so I guess like my assumption here is that there needs to be a mechanism in the cloud provider. Like if I rolled my own cluster using manually created everything, there needs to be a mechanism where the provider ID can be discovered. And so we do, so like by default, the actual logic in the controller, if it sees the provider ID already set on a node, it actually just skips that step and just assumes that the predefined provider ID is valid. So I think like the COPS case and the Cluster API case is already solved. We mostly need to be concerned of the case where the provider ID isn't set and there's nothing that's going to set it, and we need to discover what that is.
That makes sense. I think perhaps for the roll your own cluster case, maybe it is okay to say like, if you're not using some sort of auto provider ID populator, then set the provider ID using that flag you're talking about, like pass the provider ID to the kubelet.
Okay, and so I guess the question is like, do we think that's acceptable? Because it again, like it does put the burden on the user to know what the ID is and, you know, write a script or something that will dynamically fetch the ID and put it in the kubelet and whatnot. It sounds like something that we should support in some way to do automatically. But I don't know. Yeah. What do people think?
I don't see anyone unmuting to me. I mean, I feel like having an example like that, it wouldn't be that hard, right? It would be like a shell script that effectively called, I don't know if there is an AWS command to query the metadata, but you could curl the metadata to get the instance ID and put it in like dollar curly brackets, dollar whatever brackets, normal brackets.
Right. I think the other tricky part is that the provider ID is, it could be error prone to generate the provider ID because it's like AWS://zone/ instance ID or whatever it is.
Yeah, and maybe we could like relax that and like just tolerate. I don't know whether we want to relax it, but like just tolerate just a bare instance ID. Because we haven't done multi-region, like we know we haven't done multi-cloud, we haven't done multi-region. Like, is it in? I don't know. Maybe it's important.
But the zone is in there too, isn't it?
Yes, but I don't know if it needs to be honest.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think some tools use the AWS // prefix to recognize whether this is a like a Kubernetes cluster running on AWS or running on GCP. So that might be a little bit breaky, but maybe we just do AWS:/ and then the instance ID or something like that.
Yeah. So the other option here, and this is what the Azure folks do, which I really want to avoid doing, but it is an option. They run a daemon set on the cluster that acts as the node registration control loop. And so it'll catch the instance it's on, it'll catch like the node event when the instance registers, and then it'll query the instance metadata because it's a daemon set. And it'll have permissions to like register the node back to the API server so that the external control loops don't do it. It's done on the node level, but that adds the overhead of running a daemon set on running a pod on every single node just to do that one registration of the node, which is not ideal.
Yeah, it's not a terrible fallback though, right? Like, so we have, sounds like we have a bunch of options, right? Like if you're running cluster API or COPS or other tooling, like you might have some different flow. If you're going to register, if you want to keep it simple, if you're doing Kubernetes the hard way and you want to like do it in a bash script, you can like pass it via the flag. And if you want to do it in your own tooling, you can run a daemon set if you want to. I don't know. It feels like the big advantage for me is like we just don't, no matter what, if we choose any policy, we're going to upset people. We're gonna exclude some people, I think, in terms of the mapping. Like someone's going to want to use a different mapping on the node name, and it feels so niche. Like
yeah. So actually, what I was actually going to end up proposing is, should there be a config toggle that defines the policy of node naming that is in line with how you provision your cluster?
But there would still be a policy, right? And so, yeah, I don't know whether people want total freedom.
Can you expand on what exactly that config would look like, Andrew?
Sure. Maybe it's a config file or a config map. I don't know yet how we'd store it, but there's a config field maybe named node name policy, and its initial values can be private DNS and instance name. And so depending on whatever the user set in the config map or whatnot, the controller will try to find that corresponding DNS name or the instance name based on, I guess we'd also need a cluster tag depending on if we want to go that way, but it would use that policy define to find the matching instance on EC2 based on the node registered by the cluster. So it assumes that like the way the node registers itself and the name that it gives itself is mapped back to instances in a known way, and the controller knows how to query it based on that.
Got it.
One thing that springs to mind is, are we, we've made great strides in security over the past couple of years, and are we going to, do we want to allow the kubelet to be the start of this route, this chain of trust, right? Do we have any way to prevent a kubelet registering with another node's name is, I guess, my question. Or yes, obviously not one that already exists, but another node's name.
I mean, couldn't it do that today?
Yes, and that's what we're plugging with some of these strategies, where we basically give it a single, a unique. We give each node a token, either through cluster API or through COPS. That token is associated with a user. I think a username, and so we're able to effectively prevent incorrect registrations, prevent impersonation.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why customers ask for instance ID over private DNS, because technically private DNS isn't guaranteed unique if you have nodes recycling, but instance ID is. I was thinking something like, you could define something that could be discovered through tags, but that has the same problems probably.
Yeah, so actually cluster API is not generating provider ID ahead of time, so because it's relying on kubeADM. So we still have that security problem today in cluster API. What we have is a node ref controller that matches the node instance ID to the cluster API machine and then fills in a node reference. So it's after the fact still. So I'm looking to solve this problem. I know for EKS, what we do is we check, we check the IAM call that the kubelet sends. I think it's a sign request, and we check that the AWS, it's either DNS name, host name matches on the IAM call. So we use IAM as a host attestation mechanism. So yeah, so private DNS then breaks that mechanism in terms of host attestation for that node, which I think is, again, another reason why most customers just ask for the instance ID.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time figuring out where the security implications are, because the no naming policy gives you the flexibility to choose a naming policy that would enforce that the registered no name is if you want to keep it as the private DNS, you can do that. But if you wanted to switch it to something else like instance ID, you can do that too. Because right now, if we were to go with the legacy implementation, it has to be the private DNS name, which we don't want. And so in the external world where you can name the kubelet anything, assuming that someone with the privileges named the kubelet, I feel like there needs to be, in the end, it feels inevitable that there would be some config we expose to users to tell us what that is.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I want to try to avoid us baking into the cloud provider the assumption that the node name, well, I don't know. I was going to say the node name can be trusted, but I guess we could always enforce that trust through an admission controller type thing. So maybe it's fine.
Yes, and I think I'm also missing context on, the problem you're saying around trusting nodes on registration, and I think I need to do a bit of homework on that problem.
Yeah, so historically COPS gave nodes permission to register with any node name. So in theory, if you spotted another instance booting up that was in a different instance group, or whatever, you could like take that node name, and then you would be able to access the secrets from that node, which might be more privileged. We need to like figure out, I don't think it was more of a theoretical like problem we were closing. I think we need to figure out whether it's a real problem.
Yeah, that makes sense. To me, it sounds like not a cloud provider problem, but a problem for whoever is lifecycle managing or provisioning the cluster. But yeah, I'm missing context, so maybe I'll do some reading on that, and we can discuss this next time.
Yeah, I can also think about it some more. Any other thoughts on node naming policy?
I just wanted to mention that I think, Nadir, you took the notes in the September 18th agenda section.
Yeah, I did, didn't I?
Just copy this up to the.
Yeah.
Oh, these are great notes, so thank you, Nadir.
Yeah, they're very, very thorough.
Okay, so I guess we can do the next topic though, which is, Nick, I think you were going to talk about prow, build container, and push job. That's what it says. There's a link to
I just opened I was looking at the vSphere provider. So I just did some kind of straw man, like build and release script for a prow job, and some config in the test infra repository, which I think should be linked in that PR, hopefully. So I just wanted someone who is familiar with the vSphere provider to take a look at it. I tried to like kind of simplify what you guys had, because I wasn't sure what was actually necessary and what wasn't. You had some stuff where you actually give the ability to choose whether or not to like mount the Docker socket in the container, but there was some documentation saying that in prow this isn't necessary. Anyway, so I left that out for now. Just if anybody wants to take a look and see if it's heading in the right direction or not, that'd be cool.
Yeah, I could take a look. Those prow jobs are pretty old, so I wouldn't. They're not the best example, but good starting point. So feel free to iterate on it. But yeah, I can take a look.
Yeah, sounds good. Cool.
Yeah, FYI, I've been wrapping it in a cloud build as well. So I don't like prow kicks off a cloud build, which kicks off a make, which kicks off the build. The reason for doing that is that I don't know, it feels a little more trusted in that there's the extra sandbox, but it runs on the anyway. But just all right.
Yeah, I mean, if you
I want to add into their indirection.
Yeah, exactly. If you want to just throw, if you feel strongly about that approach, just throw a comment on the PR.
I don't know if I feel that strongly.
Yeah, we're doing something similar in Cluster API actually. So I can probably port something from the Cluster API configuration as well to do that.
Yeah. You said you have some jobs in the Cluster API that are similar?
Yeah, it's all of the Cluster API providers should be using Cloud Build and Image Provider, not the vSphere one. So Cluster API main repository and AWS repository in particular all using Cloud Build, and they build on every commit to the main branch.
Got it. Sure. Yeah. If you have an example to link, that would be something to compare to. Would be good.
The next topic is, Nick, again, a UX for COPS configuration.
Yeah, so this, just want to get this PR wrapped up soon. There's two subtopics here, actually, one which I didn't mention, but me and Andrew were talking about. So I'll just mention that really quickly. So I was looking a little bit into the failures. So basically, with this COPS PR that runs external cloud provider, running the ET tests on the clusters that I create. With that, where everything is set to cloud provider external, I get failures for volume ET tests because I haven't completely dug into it, but what I think is happening is there's something called like a device mounter and attacher, which is in the package volume AWS EBS section of code. And that seems to be not doing something. And when the like the volume is supposed to be mounted, it still tries to mount the volume, but it can't find where the volume is mounted. So the attach succeeds, but there's something going on where it's not able to mount because, and I think it's because it's actually not, like it's missing like this initialization of this device mounter or attacher piece of code. Anyway, so I can get around those errors by passing AWS to kubelet, or you know, if we were to use CSI, that should work as well. But so that's one piece that sort of led into the other thing, which is my question is, do we want to allow customers to, or users to configure each of these flags? So, you know, you have your Kube API server cloud provider flag, you have your kubelet cloud provider flag. There's even a top level cloud provider flag in the COPS configuration. And then there's also, if you're going not with CSI, you have this external cloud volume plugin flag, which I've added as part of this PR. So is generally the COPS strategy to let customers configure each of these flags individually and then validate for incorrect configurations? Or do you try to like bundle them all up into like one top level flag and then secretly set them all behind the customer's back?
Both is the answer. I think, there are, for example, in the cluster spec, there is a Kube API server block, which maps directly to flags on the API server. Using those is sort of considered advanced, and you don't have to do it. Most people should not have to do it for normal COPS operation. Those are sort of direct flag manipulation, and you get into undefined, unsupported behavior. We can't guarantee that like a flag will continue to be supported in the next version. We try to do some validation, but in practice, like we can't validate everything, and so we validate the things which catch us ourselves, and like basically don't do too much. The top level fields, things like the spec.cloudprovider, that's more of like a statement of intent, as in like I want to use cloud provider AWS. And so what we will do is we will then expand that out and populate the flags if they aren't already set. So in other words, there is what's called a full spec. So you can do like COPS get cluster name -- full, I think. And you will see the fully expanded specification, which includes all the inferred fields on APIs, on like Kube API server. So for example, or specifically here, for example, you have this Kube controller manager external cloud volume plugin. So if we are using external cloud provider and AWS, and let's assume that we don't support CSI yet, then we would automatically set this flag, assuming it's required, we'd automatically set this flag unless the user had overwritten it in some way. And that's why, so all these flags, looks like external cloud volume plugin, all these flags should be possible to tell whether they're set or not. So a lot of them are pointers to strings or pointers to ints. In this case, I think we're assuming that the empty value is considered the not set value. So there's not gonna be a way to clear this value, but that's okay. if that becomes a problem, we can actually, it's safe to switch to a string pointer. But anyway, that's the sort of that's the long answer. The short answer is effectively in package model components, as sort of Ole said, you look at the top level fields, and if the user has not set the deep fields, you set them to what they should be. And that doesn't get persisted into the cluster spec, but you can see it in the full spec.
I see. Okay.
Is that right, Peter, or did I mangle that?
Yeah, everything you said sounds good to me. I agree. Okay,
cool. I don't know if we currently have a way to enable CSI or disable CSI in the COP spec, to be honest.
Yeah, I didn't see anything from a quick glance, but
what you've done looks good. I will take a look at this again. I'm sorry, I haven't looked at it.
Yeah, so the volumes test failing is interesting because at least in talking with Michelle, the mount logic in kubelet should be independent of the cloud provider. And so my thinking is maybe the node was not registered properly or something, or the kubelet depends on some node field that the cloud provider sets, and maybe the volume test runs without those things set yet. But yeah, I think that's worth digging into. Maybe there's a bug somewhere that we need to fix.
Yeah. Let me dig into it and see if there's something with my setup that's wrong, or if there actually is something. So I'll try to get you an answer for that.
But thanks for working on that, Nick. Eric, so if there's something else on that, Eric, a PR for legacy multi-cert.
Yeah. So this kind of came about for our internal usage of the load balancers and needed multi-cert support, and then I saw that someone else had an issue on it. So I figured I'd give it a try and just patch it for the legacy cloud provider. I guess I was mainly looking for reviews, but also some just feedback in general, because I know I'm not sure what the process is for doing patching the legacy cloud provider, because I know we're working on the V2 stuff. But yeah, so I tested this on when I was working on it. I developed it against the 118 tag. So I'm not sure if I have to test it on, or how many of the legacy versions I should test it on. But yeah.
Yeah, although it's the legacy cloud. Well, all right. Let me say the first order, and then we can talk about something else. Although it is a legacy cloud provider, I wouldn't imagine you would backport it back to legacy versions. This would go into the next version of Kubernetes rather than going backporting. I know I saw a thread around the status of introducing features into the legacy cloud provider. I don't know where we landed on that, or whether we consider this a feature.
Yeah, so the consensus from the SIG was that we were going to add some prow automation starting 1.21, where we are not allowing PRs labeled kind feature to the legacy provider. And if you do need to add it for some critical reason, there needs to be some discussion around it from the SIG. And this is just to make sure that we're investing in the right places and getting the external providers, going and whatnot.
Yeah.
So for this PR, we are okay, right? As we get it into 120, which is, yeah. So as long as we get into 120, which is sort of end of year-ish.
Okay.
Is that right? Is that right, Andrew?
Technically speaking, yes. But if you ask me, everything should be going into out of tree. And so it's tricky because we support the legacy provider in an out of tree mode. And so that should be okay to go in past 1.20. And so I think at some point we need to fork what's currently legacy cloud providers into its own tree, so that only the external one picks it up, which is going to be complicated. But yeah, I don't ever want to promote adding new features in tree when we should be doing them out of tree.
think it might make sense to, if we're stopping new features from being merged 121, then we have that sort of period where starting 121, nothing gets merged in, and then either, I don't know, the next release or immediately we fork it, and the entry code just is forever not accepting new features.
Yeah, I agree. But the trade-off there is like there's still going to be bug fixes that go in that we need to backport. So yeah, I think there's definitely trade-offs somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't want to get us into a state where we can't add features somewhere, right? I don't know. It's like it feels like getting this into 120 into the legacy provider is the place to do it. And maybe we can ask Eric to also add it to the new provider, although it sounds like that would happen automatically anyway. Is that true?
Well, because like this is already in the new provider if it's using like the LB controller. So this is kind of just like taking that feature and putting it into the legacy provider.
Yeah, so that's something we need to figure out. But the LB controller is, technically, if we're just talking about the external cloud provider that's importing the legacy cloud provider, then yeah, all you need to do right now is get it into the legacy cloud provider and it will automatically be imported, right? Then there's the V2, which is just starting to be worked on. So that would be a separate feature. And then separately, there's people at AWS working on the load balancer controller. So I guess one thing we need to figure out is what we want to do in terms of load balancer controller and V2 provider. But we can probably talk about that next meeting.
So I'm not clear on Eric's next steps here. So like, what do we? So this is in the load balancer controller, but not in any of our built-in cloud providers, either any of our cloud providers, either external or V2 or legacy. Is that true?
Yeah, I think he should merge it, or we should get it merged into the legacy.
Yep, just please do it in 120.
Okay, good. Sounds like we have agreement, and then we have a great topic for 2 weeks where we can talk about our many code projects.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yes.
I think that was the last thing on our agenda. That was the last thing on our agenda. I don't know if anyone else has any other topics they would like to bring up, or whether we would like 8 minutes back of our Fridays. Not to lead the witness. All right, well, thank you all for attending, and we will see you in 2 weeks. I think there are going to be some great topics around the code organization, I guess, or code structuring. So enjoy your 2 weeks and see you in 2 weeks. Thank you.
See you.